let's get started. Brian, you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're here on Measure 119. If one of you guys would like to introduce the measure, tell us who you are, and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I'll just say I'm Michael Salvaggio. I'm the political director for UFCW Local 555, and also the campaign coordinator for Measure 119.
My name is Madison Walters. I am a political liaison for UFCW Local 555. I'm also one of the chief petitioners for Measure 119. Measure 119 would require businesses to submit a labor peace agreement as part of their application or renewal for licensure with the OLCC. So essentially what we're doing is adding an extra kind of check and balance into the licensure system for cannabis businesses to provide cannabis workers extra protections when they attempt to organize with a union.
So can you just break that down a little bit? When they apply for licensure, how often do they do that?
Mike, remind me, it's every...
Right now they're renewing about every year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But in terms of new applications, there's a moratorium, so...
Right. So does that mean that until they renew their license, they don't have to submit a labor peace plan?
That's correct.
That's a great
We're not looking to surprise any business owners with Monday you didn't need this and then Tuesday you suddenly need it.
Okay.
So this will be just worked into the ordinary process.
So when we talk about cannabis workers, are we talking about people who work in every part of the industry, from people who work on the farms or in a greenhouse or a warehouse growing, people who are working at the retail level, people who are working for processors? Can you describe that?
The bill attaches to several types of licenses, not all of them, primarily retail and processing. But also testing and research.
Okay. No, farm workers, no.
Farm workers, no. Wholesalers, no.
So I think the employment department, when it does these surveys of how many people work in the industry, I think most recently they said they counted 7,000 or 8,000 people in the industry. Is that an accurate number?
That sounds about accurate. In the legal industry.
Yeah. So of those 7,000 or 8,000 people, do you have a sense of how many people, how many of those might now be eligible to be in unions? Because I imagine that number also includes the farmers.
I don't have a specific number for that, but I would assume it's around half based on the numbers that we've been able to put together.
So if this were to work out, you might see an additional 4,000 or 5,000 workers joining the UFCW.
That is entirely up to the workers.
Uh-huh.
This Measure 119 not only doesn't require them to join a specific union, it doesn't require them to join a union at all. So what this will do is this will lay out more options in front of them in terms of being able to explore unionization and those options without fear of retaliation by an employer. Mm-hmm. And they can choose for themselves whether it's right or whether it's the right move for them to join a union. That can be an existing union, that can be an independent union. It's the worker's choice.
Okay. Mike, you and I have talked in the past quite a bit about the legislative background of this bill, but for the benefit of people who are watching this, could you just briefly summarize what happened in the legislature that resulted in UFCW going to the ballot?
Sure. This is a topic that we've been working on since 2021, and I think that it first started congealing into a legislative measure mid-2022. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And we brought it as a bill to the 2023 session of the legislature. It was in the House Labor Committee where there were some questions swirling around that we did not feel were very justified. And as a result, the bill was knocked off track, did not make it out of the legislature due to a muddying of the waters, so to speak. We opted to shift over to a ballot measure strategy and introduced IP 34 along with several other ballot measures. And I'm sorry, it was IP 35. Mm-hmm. And after testing those, polling those, seeing how they performed in the field, IP35, based on its performance, based on the polling, and based on its positive effect on workers, was the obvious choice to move forward with.
In other states that are early cannabis states like Colorado or Washington, has the workforce unionized in those states?
So not as much as states like California, New York, New Jersey, where they've built these protections into their cannabis laws at the onset. So
Okay.
states like Oregon and Colorado saw cannabis become legalized as a result of a ballot measure, and that's all well and good. But states like California, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, that did it through a very deliberative and nuanced legislative process, had a lot more stakeholders at the table, and were able to build a lot of these protections in at the onset.
Okay.
And so I think if Measure 119 is to pass, you'll see Oregon be the first state to have legalized it, and then after legalization, built in these worker protections.
And does UFCW represent cannabis workers in those states that have already unionized?
Yes, yeah, they have. I can't say confidently in every state, but yes, there are cannabis workers represented by UFCW locals nationwide.
Okay. So I'm curious whether, when you mentioned that you guys introduced a number of potential ballot measures and moved forward with the one that we're here to talk about today, are there other facets of the economy that UFCW is looking at and saying we could potentially add members or add value there, or is this sort of the primary focus at this point?
Well, I think right now there's specific reasons why we wanted to aim at the cannabis industry, and if we've caught the question a lot, why just the cannabis industry?
Okay.
The fact is that it's a very unique situation where you have a product that is still a federally controlled substance, and then workers attempting, many times unsuccessfully, to avail themselves of federal protections. We've literally seen judges, at least one judge in Arizona, who has openly questioned should the National Labor Relations Act apply to the cannabis industry at all. We've seen a number of law firms tell their clients in like open newsletters, business side law firms, hey, yeah, the NLRA applies right now, but wait a little while because it's being worked on. And so you don't get that kind of distinction in other industries. Like nobody in the grocery industry, I shouldn't say nobody, but you don't see that kind of national push in the grocery industry of hey, perhaps the NLRA should not apply to this specific industry. But we do see that in cannabis, and that's worrisome.
Okay. So the cannabis industry in Oregon, I think nationally, has been really under terrible financial pressure. In Oregon, it's been because of overproduction of the basic product. So we've seen Sophie's reporting on Lamoda, but Lamoda is far from the only company that's been saddled with lawsuits and tax liens, and we've seen some bankruptcies. So I'm curious what your sense of what the environment is for workers in that industry, or how are employers in an industry that's under terrible financial pressure treating their employees?
In terms of how they're treating their employees, we see the full spectrum. There's employers in that industry that are doing a great job, and their employees can't say enough good things about them. And then there's employees or employers that Madison's a lot closer to the worker stories than I am.
Yeah, I would say, we've heard some pretty critical testimony from workers about essentially wage theft and a lot of other retaliation concerns, but also critically occupational safety. One of the stories that really sticks with me is a worker who was working in one of these processing plants with a lot of volatile chemicals. Not only was their eye wash station not set up or working, it was actually still sealed in box on a shelf. So they did not have adequate safety standards kind of established. We've also had reports from workers who were not adequately trained, and so had to learn through getting chemical burns what chemicals were safe to touch and what were not. There was that horrible story about a worker last year who died.
Lake City.
Yeah, Yeah, who died from an exploding extractor. You know, so we're hearing a lot of kind of critical reports from workers, and I think when the industry is facing this crunch and we're seeing some general lawlessness, that absolutely is extending into treatment of workers as well, and this idea of really kind of bearing down on
And I
this.
think that really also sharpens the need for something like 119, because if you look at some of the testimony from the last legislative session to House Bill 3183, you'll see some cannabis owners that are writing in, putting their concerns on record, saying this is an important bill. I support this bill because I'm running my business right, and I don't want to have to compete with the people that are running their business wrong. And I think that the more that people and business owners look into it, there's this kind of urban myth that unionization is always a ding to the bottom line of the business, and that's not true. We, for example, we recently expanded into Idaho. We have a healthcare pool that is tens of thousands of members strong. We can buy healthcare plans a lot cheaper than a lot of businesses in Idaho can. And so when we go into those businesses and say, hey, we have an idea, join our healthcare pool, you will save money, you can get better healthcare for your employees, you can give them a raise, and you can also increase your bottom line to boot. That's a win-win-win, and that helps everyone. So I think a lot of cannabis businesses are recognizing that fact, and not only the directive benefits, but also a lot of them are struggling because they have problems hooking into the U.S. Revenue Code in terms of their deductions. They have problems with banking, obviously.
Yeah.
And so those are policy issues that need to be worked out, and we're eager to have those issues become our issues too, and help push.
At a national level.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, because this is a new industry for Oregon and for many states, I guess I don't have a great sense of it, and I'm not a huge cannabis consumer, so I'm not often, in fact, never, in these stores, which is totally irrelevant. But when I think about going to the Fred Meyer that I frequent, I've seen there are faces there that I've seen for many years, and so I know you guys are always pushing for better wages and conditions, but people do stay in grocery jobs for years. I'm wondering about the cannabis industry. Do you think that are people making a career out of working at a processing plant or a retail shop, or is this itinerant work where people are like, gee, I'm there for 6 months and then I'm gone, and how does that affect the ability to organize?
The short answer is we don't know yet. It's a young industry. I know people that have been working in the industry since it was, a little before it was legalized. And I know people that got in after it was legalized and then decided it's not for me. And so I think in terms of what that looks like en masse, we won't know for another 5, 10, 20 years what it looks like to have a career in the cannabis industry. Maybe I've got my favorite checker at my local Safeway who's been there for decades, and I don't know if there's going to be like a bud tender somewhere that says like, I remember when I started working here back in 2012 or whatever the year was. But are they working today? Maybe.
Do you have a sense that, I know that this creates the opportunity for people to organize and form a union, doesn't make them necessarily become USC members by any means, but how many employers are there that employ more than a couple of people? Or there when you think about, assume for a second that this passes, and then you think about the task of organizing this workforce, what does that look like in terms of just the logistics? Are there 700 small shops, or there are 50 big shops? What is it?
I think there's the 700 small shops is actually a pretty accurate estimate. But it's important to note that we're not the USCW organizing team.
Right.
And so the nitty-gritty is up to them.
Yeah.
But UFCW already represents a number of small businesses alongside the big things like Kroger, Kaiser, Safeway. There's a lot of small businesses that are represented, and a lot of what we are talking about here, especially in cannabis, as Madison mentioned, is occupational safety. And so it may not seem like a huge windfall to go into a small 3-person business and organize that, but to the workers who suddenly have a contract that, even if it doesn't come with a raise, if they come out of that with a contract that says, by the way, you're actually going to have the chemical shower set up in case of an emergency, as opposed to just in a box on a shelf, that can make all the difference in the world to them.
Yeah, and sorry, I know you guys are not in the organizing side, but it's a little hard for me to, I don't understand. So if you were to organize, I mean, if you in Oregon have, say, Safeway and Kroger, which are 2 huge employers, so there's a contract that would cover the dozens and dozens of stores that those 2 entities operate. So how would you envision a contract for cannabis workers? Would there be one contract that all employers are party to, or are you going to have a separate contract with each employer?
That's just really something to be worked out. It could happen either way. We already, like you said, we already have some kind of unified bargaining is what it's called. But if an employer says, well, I don't want to be part of that unified bargaining, I want to just do this off on my own, and that's fine too. I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if there were more generalized standards that could be, tuned to each employer's needs and have like a general baseline of working conditions. But that's frankly up to the process, up to the discussion between the union, the managers, and the employees.
I would come back to kind of a basic question, which is that we'll be considering other ballot measures, 4 or 5 of them this November, and most of those apply to all Oregonians in one way or another. This applies to a relatively small industry at this point, and so I'm just curious from a strategic point of view. I know you tried very hard on 3183. Would you have rather done this in the legislature?
Yeah, I think, given, if I had a magic wand, I guess, would happily go and use that magic wand to have this already passed and then, be working on the next thing. That didn't happen that way, but we still feel like it's important enough to get done, and so.
How much money have you guys raised?
Including the signature gathering, probably around 2.6 or so million.
Yeah.
And who's the biggest donor?
555 directly.
But how what percentage of the 2 point whatever million?
100.
100% of it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a lot of money for a relatively small number of people. Tell us about the calculation there. I mean, because you could have said, gee, we limited resources. We have you guys have a big policy agenda. You're in some huge battles right now with some of the employers. What was that decision-making process like?
Well, first of all, we don't have a huge policy agenda. We came into the 2023 session with this as our primary ask, and we had a few other little cleanups. Proud of the work that 555 did on cleaning up some of the pharmacy technician laws. But we are a private sector union, mostly private sector union. None of our members get paid with tax dollars, and we don't avail ourselves of public capital projects. So we don't really have a lot to ask for from the legislature. But moving to the ballot measure was part of a very deliberate strategy shift from playing in the state capitol to a more direct democracy model. And we kind of saw that a little bit in the 2019 session. I think was it 2019 or 2021? No, it was 2019, where we, I want to say we had IP 28 running out, but that was concurrent to the legislative session. And what we found is it's a great way to engage members. because the money that we are able to spend on our political program comes from members' hard-earned paychecks, and it's much better engaging those members when they can see that they've kind of written their own destiny instead of asked the legislature or asked another party to please add this to the agenda moving forward. And I think that's successful, given that we have more participants as a proportion of our membership in our political program than I think any other union in the state.
What is that percentage?
Not at Liberty.
Okay.
Are any of the big cannabis companies opposing this, like Nectar?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. A thing we hear about the cannabis industry a lot is that even some of the big guys are, sort of have one foot in the legal market and then one foot in the illegal market. I think a lot of that is, we have no proof of that necessarily, but we hear that from pretty much everyone in the industry. If this passes, do you guys have any reason to believe that will at least sort of right the ship in some way, or do you think that that doesn't address that problem?
There's a specific way that we hope this is going to right the ship, but obviously it's not a panacea for every problem in the cannabis industry. But we've heard anecdotal tales from employees that, for reasons that will become obvious, don't like to be named, where they get paid in product as opposed to cash, and it's a very difficult decision for them because, on the one hand, yes, you could probably file a BOLI claim.
Is that legal? Maybe that's a dumb question. Is
No.
it legal
It's
to
not
pay
legal.
someone with? Okay.
It is legal in certain circumstances to pay a person in kind, but not in this circumstance for a number of reasons. Not least of all because when they pay someone in product, the idea is not that person's going to go home and roll the world's biggest blunt. That finds its way into the gray markets and the black markets.
Right, and you can't legally sell it unlicensed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of workers in this field that are undocumented. How does this would those people be able to unionize, or is this exclusive of them?
I don't see why they wouldn't, as long as they were in an affected license.
But okay, so this obviously wouldn't. You couldn't unionize if you were working for a licensee who was actually not licensee.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because we just simply wouldn't
Sure, they're off
legally
the
know
grid.
about them.
Yeah.
Right. And just to go a little far afield from 119. We in putting this together, I think there was a report earlier this year that came out from, so I want to say it was like a joint effort between Berkeley and UC Davis, and just did a really fantastic qualitative study of the undocumented workers in the cannabis industry in Oregon and Washington. It's incredibly illuminating and just really outlines how, even if 119 passes, there's still a lot of steps to go to some really meaningful equity to a lot of workers.
Does this include hemp workers, or no? This is just
No,
Okay.
Because my understanding is that hemp, so long as it's less than 0.3% THC, is already covered under federal agricultural laws. So there's no arguments about like, hey, maybe we can make the NLRA not apply to hemp.
Sure.
However, the NLRA doesn't apply to agricultural workers, and that's a whole other issue again. So still plenty of work to do on worker equity.
When I was just Googling around reading stuff about this measure, I noticed the Eugene Weekly story that they did, I don't know if it's this week or last week, a couple of shops down there that had already somehow managed to join UFCW. First question is, how could they do that? If this measure is sort of the gateway toward allowing people to organize, whether they join USCW or another union, how come they were already able to do that?
Right now, there's nothing illegal about forming a union as a cannabis worker.
Okay.
It's just that the ambiguities and loopholes in federal law make it very, very easy for the employer to push back against that without getting themselves in trouble.
So this would affirmatively say something that you might be able to do now, you can definitely do.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's still up to the workers.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys saw that story. Did you have any reaction to it?
We did see the story, and you'll notice that they did not print our response, which
I
was...
thought Miles was quoted that.
I think he had a preliminary quote, but that was before they told us what the gist of the story was. He asked for responses, and then we said, well, here's the reasons that that's documentably untrue, because they make certain allegations in there about reps not showing up to things and what, and we have the documents to prove that that's not true, and they opted not to print that. You'd have to ask them why they opted not to print that.
Okay. So I think the only voters pamphlet statement that was published in opposition is Oregon Taxpayers United, who oppose many measures. As you're working your way around the state or going to editorial boards, are there other people that you're running into who are opposing you?
To be really honest, the only other opposition came from which was emailed to me, besides the comments on Facebook, was a cannabis owner that we had been in touch with during the legislative session that said he doesn't support this because it doesn't go far enough. And appreciate the zeal, but I still think that we hit the right mark.
Can you say who that was? Or what company?
I can check and get back to you if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay.
Have you polled this measure?
Yes.
How's it poll?
It pulls passing.
What?
We're 70-30 or 51-49?
Between those.
On the lower scale or on the upper scale?
We're still in the middle of the campaign.
Okay.
That polling involves a lot of moving pieces that include message testing and all that, and so I'm not going to be sharing polling until the campaign's over.
Okay.
But I want to write this down because I don't want to forget to get back to you on that. Check who was.
Was it a big company or was it a little?
It wasn't. I had not heard of it before.
Okay. I was just curious if it was one of the big guys, but it sounds like it wasn't.
The genesis of this measure includes that legislative history that you talked about, and that was followed by the attempt to recall Representative Holby. I'm wondering, that's not part of this ballot measure, but it's part of how we got here. UFCW regret now trying to recall Holby?
Well, I want to say that it is part of how we got here, but it was also a number of other things that led to that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that in the context of Measure 119, I don't think we really give it much thought.
Okay. So you're moving on to parallel tracks in essence.
Well, I think one of those tracks are not moving anywhere.
Well, so yeah, that's not, that's what, okay.
No,
so they're not connected.
I don't think there's a lot of, regret, but there's also not a lot of celebration. We're done with that. That's in the past.
Got it. What haven't we asked you about this measure that you would want us to know?
I spent a lot of time last night reading up on all of the little legal intricacies. I guess hoping / on the off chance that you were going to ask about, how does this square with the machinist's ruling of 1976 or whatever.
Yeah.
Suffice to say, I'm very aptly prepared for that.
But I mean, just in terms of what you would want the public to know, I think we've covered a lot of the basics here, but if there's something we haven't asked you that we should have, or something that you want to reaffirm, let's hear that.
I mean, I just want to leave with, I think this is a really common sense measure. Do cannabis workers deserve organizing rights, or do they not? And I think, even though we got a little bit more technical with how licensure process operates, that's kind of the base question that voters are being asked on the ballot this November.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, I think that's covered. Thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you so
for having
much.
us.